let's get a taste of his music before we meet him and find out the range of what goes on in a composer's mind. This is the opening of Concerto en Tango for cello and orchestra by my guest, whom we're about to speak with, Miguel del Aguila. And reluctantly, we leave it behind about halfway through that piece, which is called Concerto en Tango for Cello and Orchestra by my guest, Miguel del Aguila, whose piece is being played with the Spokane Symphony on Saturday night and Sunday afternoon. That was the Buffalo Philharmonic, conducted by Joanne Falletta, the music director there, and the cellist Roman Mikhailov. And so, welcome to Spokane, Miguel.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming over here and bringing us your music. And what I've already discovered is a great range of your music, and I hope we'll get many more examples of that. So I guess if we're going to start talking about the range of your music, we talk a little bit about some of where that came from, some of the music that inspired you as a kid, that got you really going.
Well, I grew up in Latin America, in Uruguay, Montevideo, Buenos Aires, the whole Rio de la Plata area. And of course, there is a lot of tango influence. That's our folklore.
Of course.
And when I moved to America in the 70s, I went to school at San Francisco Conservatory, and I picked up also different interests, jazz, and then I moved to Vienna, Austria, where I lived 10 years, and I picked up very little of Austrian folklore. But there are other things, right? It was the city of music, so there was a lot going on and some great music. But style-wise, I think I sort of I had to leave Uruguay during the military regimes, right? So I always feel I carry the entire folklore in my mental suitcase, and as I'm composing, sometimes things come out, and a lot of it comes out from those 20 years I lived there as a kid, and it's there. It's my subconscious, and when I'm composing, it's there.
Yeah,
it sort of comes to light.
Yeah.
Of course, there is always influences of things you hear, but very often I hear these comments that my music sounds Latin. I mean, rhythm is for me the most important aspect of music. And dance, there is always some dance element present. I can't imagine music without dance. But the Latin American element in my music, it's always a little through a nostalgic veil. And I think that has to do because I don't live there for the past 40 years. I don't live there, right? So it's always looking through time.
And your own instrument is the piano, right?
Yes.
And so as a pianist, when you were, during those formative times and coming to the San Francisco Conservatory, were you identifying as a pianist or as a composer or as a musician in general or what?
One of those people who never got to decide what they want to do for life. Since I was a little kid, I always saw myself as a pianist composer, like a Franz Liszt or Chopin. Before I knew the name of that job, that's what I wanted to be, and that's what I did. So I always played piano. And actually, in my education, I switched back and forth. Like my degree in San Francisco is in piano, and then Vienna is composition. So also for composers of my generation who went to school in the 60s, it was difficult times. You said you were a composer, people run away from you because composers did so many crazy things and experimental. And
you were almost required to, the vibe at the time, weren't you?
You were. Yeah. And imagine San Francisco at that time. It was just like a crazy place. Different kind of audience. It was all experiments, and the audience was not the usual audience. It was really a world, a secret society, people who wrote music to experiment. So I was never a part of that. And as I felt more or less interested in the local new music world, I actually did more performing or did more composing. So I've always done both. And the problem is, usually when I compose too much, I feel guilty because I'm not practicing. Then I look at my hands and I see them shrinking. But and when I play too much, I think, well, I'm not composing. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be a composer. I see myself, obviously, as a composer.
Well, Leonard Bernstein had that dilemma, too. But if I can project there, then as a performer, you probably care how your music is received and whether somebody gets something from it and engages in it, don't you?
I think I would send every composer to perform their music because what you develop is a responsibility towards your audience who pays to be there, and the musicians who perform for your audience who are judged really by the way they play your music. So since I was very young, I always believed in that responsibility, and that's why I never took lightly writing a piece that may or may not work. I think when you perform yourself, you know you are under pressure to make something that works and not something that's in your head. We composers have crazy ideas of crazy music, and I think everybody does, but a lot of it doesn't work in the real world. You're an architect, you want to design a glass bridge which is hung by strings from balloons or something like that. You could do it in your mind, it's beautiful, but you cannot make it, probably you can't make it work, or at least not now. And I think for some composers there is not that filter of reality if they don't perform. So performing really just puts your feet in the ground, and it's very important. I'm very lucky, I think, that I've always, since I was a kid, I was confused between composer and pianist and did both.
Speaking with Miguel del Aguila, whose piece opens the Spokane Symphony concert tomorrow night. But let's move to one of your pieces, and I gather from something you said to me that Seduction has had a pretty good career. It exists in several different forms.
I'm a very practical person, so I usually make many versions of my music. Seduction is one of them. There are like 10 versions of it, and if a musician tells me I have a duo of flute and bassoon, would you write this version for? I always do it.
Sure.
It's like dressing your music in different clothes, and it's fun too. So Seduction is originally started on the flute, clarinet, piano version, and the name Seduction tells you about the seductive part of it, which is an obsessive rhythmic pattern that begins on the second half of the piece. It has a slow, very lyrical introduction, has a little influence from Brazilian choro, which is a slow, tuneful melody. And then it goes into a rhythmic section. Like most of my rhythms, they're very regular. I naturally write 13/16 plus 7/16. So there is a lot of that, and it just drives all the way to the end.
9-minute piece, Seduction. Let's hear it played by a group called the Divan Consort. Wow, music by my guest. That was the original version, the flute, clarinet, and piano version of Seduction by Miguel del Aguila. My guest, whose overture is being performed by the Spokane Symphony on the Saturday night and Sunday afternoon concert. That was a group called the Divan Consort. Back to Miguel and the Chautauquan Summer Overture that you wrote. And first, a bit about that place, Chautauqua. Aspen and Tanglewood get such huge press, but Chautauqua holds its own as a great place for music, doesn't it?
Yeah, Chautauqua has a great history. At the end of the 19th century, it was supposed to be a place where adults continue their education.
Talk about ideas.
Yeah, new ideas, the idea of educating yourself, taking control of your own life. And so, of course, it evolved a lot in over 100 years. But musically, it's a great place. It's a summer festival mainly, which has many different elements, not only music. And I was there first year as a guest and then 3 more years as the resident composer. And I had many jobs there. At that time, the audience had not been really exposed to modern contemporary music. So my job, in a way, I found out later, was to just expose these people to contemporary music. And I was always warned, every piece I wrote, please be a little conservative. These people are not used to. So the end result of that is, during those 3 years, I have a set of pieces that I wrote every year for that. And they could be identified as my Chautauqua pieces because they're all very clear thematically, and some get played more than others. My tango trio was written for this purpose and gets played a lot, chamber music. And some other pieces, my piano concerto, Chautauquan Summer Overture, they're all easy, relatively easy pieces to follow. They were all done with 1 or 2 rehearsals, so they are difficult, but they're not that difficult for the performance, but not to put together. So this piece is Chautauquan Summer Overture. It's really like a year time in Chautauqua. During that time, I lived in New York City. I couldn't write a note in New York City. It's just too busy. So I always escaped to Chautauqua, which is south of Buffalo, right on Chautauqua Lake. And in winter, to me, it was just such a beautiful place. The lake freezes, and it's a different world. It has some of the highest snowfalls in the country. So to me, it was a beautiful world. So the piece actually, in 10 minutes, conveys this change from winter to summer. So as it begins, you hear the wind, and the lake is frozen. And then in the middle comes this sort of nostalgic part, which is a duet between clarinet and oboe, of that sort of winter loneliness, and because it's a very isolated place also. And then slowly the lake comes back to life, and there are the animals, the ducks, and you see more of them, which is really what happened. And green starts to happen. And then slowly Chautauqua the festival begins. And so the city, which is really, Chautauqua is like a ghost town in winter. All these places are empty. So people start coming, so it all comes to life, and there is this sort of celebration feel. And then there is the big 4th of July fireworks, which I included in my music.
Do you know how he found it, or do you know anything about
I don't know.
Yeah.
There are lots of my works on YouTube. And nowadays I know many musicians check on YouTube for repertoire when they are looking for repertoire. So he asked me, there is excerpts of it on YouTube, and he mailed me saying, can I listen to the whole thing? It's not recorded. So I sent him a recording.
And I can just imagine, well, let's see, it's a January concert, and who knows what the weather will be, but people will probably be starting to get tired of winter. So this guy is going to give everybody a hopeful, lovely 10-minute journey into
the preview of summer,
into what's going to happen for the next 6 months. And what a great idea of that piece. So that's the Chautauquan Summer Overture, which does open the Spokane Symphony concert Saturday night and Sunday afternoon. The music by my guest Miguel del Aguila. So that's that, and you expressed it well. So let's go and talk about a little of the other of your music that I'll be able to play for the rest of the hour. What about this piece, Silence, or Silence?
Silence. To me, it's a very special piece. my younger brother passed away suddenly in 2012, and I felt obviously terrible. And this piece just happened spontaneously, no plan, no commission, nothing. It's just I wrote it to probably deal with these laws. And it's called silence because that's when somebody is not there anymore. You know, we musicians perceive the world through sound, so it's silence. It's a voice you'll never hear again. So I wrote it originally for violin and piano, and since then it's been arranged for many instruments. You will hear the clarinet version of it, clarinet and piano. Miriam Adam, a great clarinetist, and she asked me for this piece she wanted to record it, so that's the version you're hearing. It's has some, obviously it's very nostalgic. It doesn't have a structure usually. For me, structure is very important in music, to have, beginning, the middle, and to go somewhere. So this piece is really almost improvisatory.
Well, in just a moment, we'll hear silence. I want to spend another couple of minutes talking with you about a couple of other things. My guest, Miguel del Aguila, and you're going to go out to Eastern and work with composers. And so what's that like when the guy from outside, the person from outside comes in and there's some students who have written a range of music? Mm-hmm. What's your job? What can you help them with? What should you not do in encountering a piece just quickly by a young performer?
The way I see teaching composition, first of all, I don't believe you can get a degree in composition or teach it. Most of it is not teachable. You can teach the skills. I think a psychologist could teach composition pretty well, because it's all about letting out what's in your head and expressing yourself through your music and communicating with an audience through your music. Those are very difficult things to teach as a musician. So when I teach composition, which I like very much, I really look forward to hear to new music. I always comment about this music, or my remarks are always as audience. I tell them, I'm your audience guinea pig. The difference is I'm not going to throw tomatoes at you if it's bad. So, and I know very often why it's not working, whereas somebody who's not a composer will say, well, I don't like this. I don't know why, right? So I always listen to the music through that point of view. Very often, I think because of the academic environment, which is very hectic, kids work very hard. They're very distracted, and you can't be very distracted to compose music, right? So very often they're so centered, so focused on the technique part, on the harmonic part, on the trees, and they forget the entire forest. And very often my job is to bring them back to the forest, to take them out of the crazy madness of academia and say, take a step back, relax. Why are you composing? Or what do you really want to say with this piece? And sometimes it's amazing that in school, students are actually so busy writing exercises, writing music that has to be done. They tend to forget, why am I writing this? What am I expressing with this? What feelings do I want the audience to have when they hear this? And often I tell them this, they look at me like, what the hell are you asking? What's that? And I realize they never ask themselves. And I think that's important. That's the most important dimension when you compose. And it's probably more important than the other elements, which are the tools.
Sure.
And sometimes in composition, you tend to confuse the tools for the actual piece of furniture that you're making, right? So tools are tools, but the end result is something that functions, not the tools.
That's wonderful, Miguel del Aguila, on teaching, which you'll be doing at 12:30 or
12.
At noon?
12 noon.
At 12
12
noon.
to 1, there is a lecture, and then I do 2 other separate groups at 1 and at 2.
Great. Okay, so that is at noon today at Eastern Washington University, and I know that they always welcome citizens to sit in on things like that, so that will be there in the music department. Well, thank you for this entire lovely engagement you've given us about A lot of great thoughts.
Thank you for having me here.
So we will go back to this piece that you wrote upon the death of your brother. So you use the English pronunciation.
Silence.
Simply silence in the clarinet and piano version. So again, thanks for visiting us.
Thank you.
Music, Miguel del Aguila, right now. The music of my guest for this last hour, Miguel del Aguila. That was his piece, Silence, which he had written as a lament on the death of his brother. He did want us to have some contrast, and so we're going to go straight away into some contrast from his Salon Buenos Aires. He was talking about the music that of the part of the world where he grew up. This is the third movement called Obsessed Milonga. There we go. There was some energy. That was the third movement of a piece called Salon Buenos Aires, the movement called Obsessed Milonga, played by a group called Camerata San Antonio. The music of Miguel del Aguila for this last hour that we've just encountered, and his Chautauquan Summer Overture is going to open the Spokane Symphony concert Saturday night and Sunday afternoon.